Welcome to the deep dive. We're really thrilled to have you with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
So, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack some truly fascinating excerpts from Richard Hofstadter's Pulitzer Prize-winning book. It's from 1963, and it's called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life.
Yeah, and it's a dense one, but so rewarding.
Oh, completely.
Oh.
We are going to be exploring Hofstadter's historical framing, his highly specific definitions, and this really incredible gallery of quotes he collected from the 1950s. They just perfectly capture this deep American suspicion of the mind.
They really do.
And I'll say this right up front. If you are someone who loves to learn, if you ever felt overwhelmed by that tension between quote-unquote book smarts and street smarts in American culture, well, this deep dive is going to give you the ultimate historical blueprint for exactly why that tension exists.
Before we begin, though, because our source material contains politically charged content, and it touches on both left-wing and right-wing figures from the 1950s, we want to make it absolutely clear to you that we are not taking sides or endorsing any of these viewpoints.
Right. Good point.
Yeah, our role today is strictly to impartially report on the content provided, and just convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. So Hofstadter wrote this book looking back at the political and intellectual climate of the 1950s, which was a time when this massive wave of anti-intellectualism just swept across America.
It was huge.
It really was. And it wasn't just some fringe attitude either. It became a very self-conscious national movement. I mean, we're talking about the McCarthy era here.
Right, a time when universities and intellectuals were directly in the line of fire.
Exactly. It was a period where simply having a critical mind was suddenly viewed as a massive liability.
It was a very specific, almost oppressive cultural atmosphere, and it really crystallized during the 1952 presidential election. Oh, that election is such a perfect example.
It is. You had Adlai Stevenson running against Dwight D. Eisenhower, and the contrast couldn't have been starker. Stevenson was widely viewed as a highly articulate intellectual. He was famously branded as an egghead.
An egghead, right.
Which was not a compliment.
No, not at all. And Eisenhower, on the other hand, he represented the conventional, practical, highly relatable candidate.
The guy you'd want to have a beer with, basically.
Exactly. And to understand how intense this cultural divide was, we can look at the historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. He wrote right after that election that the intellectual was, quite literally, on the run today in American society.
Wow. On the run?
Yeah. Schlesinger actually claimed that anti-intellectualism had become the anti-Semitism of the businessman.
That is such a striking phrase. It really paints a picture of this deep, almost systemic resentment. The intellectual wasn't just someone people disagreed with. They were actively distrusted by the practical, business-minded class. And Eisenhower himself actually leaned into this framing. He reportedly shared a definition of an intellectual that was really popular at the time. He called an intellectual a man who takes more words than are necessary to tell more than he knows.
Which is a brilliant rhetorical dismissal if you think about it.
Oh, it's so sharp.
It positions the intellectual as a pretender, someone who uses big words to mask a lack of the simple, plain truths that supposedly guide the rest of society.
Right.
And for the first few years of the 1950s, that was the dominant national mood. Investigating teachers and professors for disloyalty wasn't just a government activity, it was a surprisingly common local pursuit. The intellectual was just viewed as inherently suspicious.
But this dominant national mood didn't last. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik.
Right, the game changer.
Yeah. Here's where it gets really interesting. Almost overnight, the American conversation about experts was forced to pivot.
What's fascinating here is the massive irony of that moment. Overnight, America realizes that hating experts might actually be a profound hazard to national survival.
Yeah, suddenly it's not a joke anymore.
Exactly. The exact same society that was just spending its time investigating teachers for disloyalty is suddenly incredibly worried about their low salaries.
Oh, the irony is just too good.
Politicians and military leaders are suddenly begging scientists to build missiles and catch up to the Soviets. But, and this is crucial, we have to be careful not to misinterpret this shift.
Right, because they weren't suddenly embracing the life of the mind, were they?
Not even a little bit. This wasn't a sudden romantic love for intellect. It was a sheer panic to produce Cold War resources.
They needed results.
Yes, they wanted the practical output of the scientists. They wanted the rockets, the math, the engineering. They did not necessarily want their critical thinking applied to society at large.
And that distinction between practical output and critical thinking is actually the absolute core of Hofstadter's argument.
Yes, it is.
He makes this brilliant distinction between intelligence and intellect, and they sound like synonyms to most of us, right?
Yeah.
But Hofstadter argues they are fundamentally different things.
Understanding this difference is really the key to unpacking the whole book. Hofstadter defines intelligence as almost an animal virtue.
An animal virtue.
Yeah. It is practical, it is adjustive, and it works within a framework of limited, clearly stated goals. If you have a problem, intelligence solves it. And because of this, intelligence is unfailingly praised by everyone. Nobody is against intelligence.
But intellect is something else entirely. Intellect is critical, creative, and contemplative.
Exactly.
While intelligence evaluates a situation to solve a problem, intellect evaluates the evaluations. It steps back and questions the broader meaning of the entire situation. It asks if the problem we are solving is even the right problem to begin with.
And that questioning of the premise is exactly what makes people so uncomfortable.
Right, because you're rocking the boat.
To bring this into focus, we can look at how our society treats different kinds of genius.
Yeah, Hofstadter gives us an amazing historical analogy from the source material to illustrate this. Thomas Edison versus Josiah Willard Gibbs.
A perfect comparison.
Right, so Thomas Edison is the pure embodiment of intelligence and practical invention. He invented the light bulb, the phonograph things you can hold, use, and commercialize. And because of that, he is an absolute American idol. But then you have Josiah Willard Gibbs.
Gibbs is a fascinating counterpoint here. He represented pure intellect.
Right. He laid the theoretical foundations for modern physical chemistry. The guy was an absolute genius, but his work was purely theoretical. It was abstract.
And so what happened to him?
Well, he lived in total obscurity at Yale for 32 years. The university could barely find a handful of graduate students who could even comprehend his work. And Yale never even bothered to give him an honorary degree.
Which is wild, but you can actually see this play out in modern corporate culture, too.
Oh, absolutely. Think about your own workplace.
Yeah, we heavily incentivize intelligence. The person who optimizes the supply chain, or fixes the software bug, or increases the quarterly margin, they are rewarded because they are solving practical, immediate problems.
They're moving the needle.
Right. But the intellect, the person who pauses the meeting to ask if the product itself is actually ethical or good for society, is often treated as a roadblock.
Yeah, like, why are you slowing us down?
Exactly. They are viewed with deep suspicion, as if they are just being a nuisance or disrupting the practical flow of things.
That dynamic is everywhere once you start looking for it.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if that's why we idolize tech founders who drop out of college to build a product, but we are deeply skeptical of the academics studying the ethics of that exact same product.
It's the exact same reflex.
And Hofstadter actually captured this cultural reflex perfectly in the 1950s. He gathered these incredible examples, basically a gallery of quotes and stories that show this anti-intellectual attitude permeating every single layer of society.
And looking at the specific language used in these examples is incredibly revealing.
Okay, take the word egghead,
Yeah.
which we mentioned earlier with Adlai Stevenson. The popular right-wing novelist Louis Bromfield actually wrote out a formal definition for it.
And it was brutal.
It really was. He called an egghead a person of spurious intellectual pretensions, fundamentally superficial, anemic, a bleeding heart, and someone completely out of touch with the experience of sound, able men.
Notice the framing there. The intellectual isn't just wrong about policy. They are portrayed as physically weak, conceited, and entirely disconnected from the real world.
Like a cartoon.
Yes, it turns the intellectual into a caricature, a cartoon villain who is actively sneering at the common man.
And that caricature of the weak, out-of-touch intellectual practically gave politicians a blank check to favor amateurs over experts.
Oh, definitely.
There's a staggering story from 1957 involving a man named Maxwell H. Gluck. He was appointed as the United States ambassador to Ceylon, which is modern-day Sri Lanka. Now, Gluck had zero experience in politics or diplomacy.
None at all.
But what he did have was a record of contributing $20,000 to $30,000 to the Republican campaign.
Which inevitably led to a completely disastrous confirmation hearing.
It was so brutal. Senator Fulbright asked him some basic geographical and political questions, And Gluck actually had to admit he didn't know the name of the Prime Minister of India or the Prime Minister of Ceylon.
The very country he was being sent to?
Yes, the country he was supposed to be the ambassador for.
Which is astounding. But what's even more revealing is how President Eisenhower defended the appointment.
Right, because he didn't back down.
No. When pressed by the media about Gluck's glaring ignorance, Eisenhower just brushed it off. He stated that the man had a good FBI report, a solid business career, and that he could simply learn what he needed to know once he got there.
Wow.
The underlying assumption here is a cornerstone of anti-intellectualism. It's the idea that practical business success is a completely adequate substitute for formal knowledge and expertise, even in something as delicate as international diplomacy.
And you see that exact same tension between practical business sense and deep expertise in the sciences, too. It wasn't just diplomats getting brushed aside.
No, the scientific community faced this constantly. A perfect example involves Secretary of Defense Charles E. Wilson during a Senate hearing.
This one is so telling.
He was tried to justify cutting funding for pure research, and he famously stated he wasn't interested in why potatoes turn brown when they are fried.
Why potatoes turn brown.
Right. He wanted researchers to focus purely on brass tacks military projects.
He actually complained that researchers just wanted a pot of money to think ahead without supervision. He claimed, if you know what you are doing, why, it is not pure research.
Which completely misses the point of scientific inquiry.
Totally.
It's a stunning dismissal of the entire concept of exploring the unknown. It reduces science only to what can be immediately weaponized or monetized. If you aren't building a better potato or a better missile, your thinking is considered wasteful.
And if something was considered wasteful, it wasn't long before it was considered dangerous. There was this intense, fiery populist rhetoric directed specifically at the Ivy League and Harvard professors, framing them as literal enemies of the common person. The writer Frank Chodoroff wrote that any literate housewife endowed with common sense could evaluate the nation's economic problems just as well as the experts at the Rockefeller Brothers Fund.
The appeal to the literate housewife is a classic populist move.
How so?
It completely erases the value of specialized study. It flatters the common citizen by telling them that their everyday intuition is just as valid, if not more so, than years of rigorous academic training. It democratizes expertise to the point where expertise no longer exists.
Right. If everyone's an expert, no one is.
Exactly.
But it shows that if something was complex or hard to understand, it wasn't just not my taste. It was suddenly framed as a literal threat. Representative George Dondero of Michigan took this same populist anger and aimed it at modern art.
Well, this is a wild jump.
It is. He stood on the floor of Congress and called movements like Cubism and Surrealism isms of depravity, decadence, and destruction. He actually claimed modern art was basically a weapon of the Russian Revolution meant to destroy American tradition.
Which is quite a leap, but that is a perfect example of how anything abstract or challenging to traditional sensibilities was immediately labeled not just as bad art, but as actively subversive.
Right.
If it doesn't look like a realistic painting of a landscape, if it requires interpretation or challenges your perception, it must be an elite plot to destabilize society.
And this suspicion of the abstract extended deeply into religion as well. Hofstadter looks at the immense influence of Billy Graham, who was drawing massive crowds and was one of the most admired men in the world at the time.
The huge cultural figure.
Huge. And Graham warned his followers that educating the mind without educating the soul creates a monstrosity. He argued that partial education is actually worse than no education at all if it just leads to things like rationalism and humanism.
This is deeply rooted in the American evangelical tradition. It is the belief that the discipline of the heart and old-fashioned moral principles are inherently superior to the discipline of the mind.
So intellect is actually a threat to morality.
In this view, yes. Formal education is a threat because it might expose people to new trends in thought that challenge absolute moral standards. Intellectuals are seen as the people stripping away the moral foundation of society by constantly questioning it.
And you didn't have to be at a Billy Graham crusade or a congressional hearing to feel this.
Yeah.
Hofstadter found this attitude right down at the local school board level.
Yeah, this might be my favorite example.
It's so good. He shares a letter from a parent who is absolutely furious about the shifting standards in their child's education. The parent writes about how much they love the child-centered kindergarten programs. You know, the games, the music, the friendliness. But then the child reached the 4th grade and suddenly faced arithmetic.
And how did the parent describe the teacher?
The parent describes the math teacher as having a bloodless finger, comparing her to a movie gangster clutching for his gun simply because the teacher was tracking arithmetical ability and grades in a class book.
That imagery is incredible. The math teacher as a movie gangster.
It's just for taking grades.
It perfectly captures the resentment against rigid, knowledge-based standards. The parent felt that focusing on mere academic competence was heartless and ignored the child's whole personality.
And the craziest part is that this wasn't just coming from frustrated parents. The administrators agreed.
They really did.
Hofstadter quotes a junior high school principal from Illinois who actively argued that reading, writing, and arithmetic shouldn't be forced on everyone. This principal actually said that requiring every boy to read is as illogical as requiring every boy to play the violin.
Wow.
He said requiring a girl to spell well is like requiring her to bake a good cherry pie.
When you pull all these threads together, from the ambassador who doesn't know the local leader's name, to the defense secretary mocking pure research, to the congressman attacking cubism, to the principal comparing spelling to a cherry pie, you start to see the massive scale of this cultural attitude.
It's everywhere.
It wasn't isolated. It was a comprehensive worldview.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at this massive wave of resentment across politics, business, religion, and schools. Are these anti-intellectuals just cartoon villains trying to destroy society?
That is the ultimate paradox Hofstadter presents. Anti-intellectualism isn't just a pure, unalloyed evil, and it is rarely pushed by people who simply hate ideas. In fact, it is an ambivalence.
Wait, so if it's not just people who hate ideas, who is actually driving this?
The great irony is that the leaders of anti-intellectual movements are rarely uneducated people. They are often what Hofstadter calls marginal intellectuals.
Marginal intellectual.
Yes. They are editors, ministers, politicians, and pundits. They are highly articulate people who are absolutely obsessed with their own specific ideas, and they use their own intellect to attack the broader intellectual community.
So the people leading the charge against the elites were often elites themselves.
Exactly.
They aren't waking up in the morning looking in the mirror and saying, today I will strangle an idea. They actually think they are the good guys, protecting society.
Yes, they see themselves as defending the common man against an arrogant establishment. If we connect this to the bigger picture, anti-intellectualism survives and thrives in America precisely because it is so deeply tied to inherently good, defensible American values.
Values like egalitarianism.
Yes, the belief that everyone is equal is a core American value, but that easily morphs into the belief that everyone's opinion is equally valid regardless of expertise. If we are all equal, why should a Harvard professor's view on the economy count more than the literate housewives?
Right. It feels democratic, even if it's deeply flawed. And you see the same thing with religion.
Exactly. Moral religion, the desire for a good, righteous society, can easily become a suspicion of any critical thought that questions traditional morality.
That makes total sense.
And then there's practical business success. The drive that built the American economy frequently results in a total dismissal of anything that doesn't produce an immediate profitable result. Anti-intellectualism doesn't exist in a vacuum. It rides on the coattails of our most cherished national myths.
You know, understanding this history is so incredibly empowering. It prevents us from feeling simply victimized by info overload or by the frustrations we see in society today.
It really gives you a lens to see the world through.
It does. When you see someone on the news bashing experts, or when you feel that friction at work between just getting things done and wanting to think deeply about the broader purpose, you now know this isn't a new glitch in the system. The tension between practical, problem-solving intelligence and critical, questioning intellect is permanently baked into our cultural DNA.
And that tension isn't going anywhere. In fact, it might be taking its most profound form yet. Think about the tools we are building today, like artificial intelligence. We are programming machines to possess supreme intelligence. That ability to manipulate massive amounts of data and solve practical tasks perfectly within a set of limited goals.
Pure intelligence.
Yes, but based on Hofstadter's definition, can a machine ever possess intellect? Can it step back, evaluate the evaluations, and question the broader meaning of its own existence or the goals we give it? And if our society already distrusts human intellect, what will happen when we are fully surrounded by systems optimized only for pure, uncritical intelligence? Something for you to think about until our next deep dive.